The Mamluk revival style commonly conjures up images of geometric designs often seen in the streets of Cairo, reimagined through the 19th century. And when we see these things, we tend to think of bazaars where merchants are peddling artisan wares in the dusty heat under 18th and 19th century colonial occupations. However, the Mamluk revival style speaks to an era that's quite a bit older than that, and it's an extremely interesting revival period for the antiques world. The category exists in the complex dynamics of how Europe and the later Ottoman Empire are engaging with each other, and the revival itself being of crafts dating back to over 500 years by renewed interests of very different groups of people. In the West, the interest in all Egyptian subjects had exploded since Napoleon's conquest in the 18th century, and it continued through British occupation. And in the Ottoman Empire in Egypt, there was a renewed interest in the old Mamluk dynasties. The nostalgia, yearning for freedom, state propaganda, and an outlet to reject increasing westernization were all important factors in the popularization of a style that went 19th century viral. How nice it is to start with an antique. Folks that aren't usual followers of the channel might be surprised to see this screen, but let's have right at it a beautiful piece of Ottoman Empire era textiles, really. Nice embroidery. What we have is a curtain. I think it would be a sort of pilgrimage banner. For religious purposes. You get the human in there to actually see how large this would have been. For our purposes, this is actually a really nice starting point because there's embroidered text on here that indicates a date for this piece, which puts it within the reign of Mahmud II, and that's going to place this piece within the early 19th century, and during a period of time where the Ottoman Empire is undergoing its own westernization process. It's sort of Mahmud II is sort of referred to as a Peter the Great type figure. A transformation of traditional ways into modern state operation. If we look at this item, really impressive. All around, I think, shocking to see it only hammered down for $715. I mean, I think this was a real find. Really extravagant piece. I mean, you see there highlighted dating to 1820 to 1821, and given the size of it, quite monumental. 32 bids to $715. I mean, I should have bought this. So where are we at? We're in 19th century Egypt. Just recently been sort of tossed around between the French and the Ottoman Empire. Looking back at all of this rich history and more recent rich history of Mamluk warrior society and these beautiful instances of fine medieval craftsmanship, and in particular really fine metalwork and engraving and inlay and even figural decoration on metalwork that isn't seen done elsewhere in such a fashion. And here we've got a really nice looking little snuff type box. They call it a little brass casket, and we really have this sort of uh, Mamluk style animal decor on top, where there's all of this sort of ornate growth into these animal figures at the center. And I don't see any of the sort of fish and flying ducks that are really reminiscent. Oh, that might be some in the corner over there. Unfortunately for myself, I pre-recorded the eBay listings, but rather nice piece. And on the underside, really get some confidence in the age, especially seeing the hinges there. You get a nice repoussé pattern on the inside, as this was sort of pushed out when it was fashioned. Just very obviously a very fine 19th century piece. And honestly, a category that I think is punching below its weight. If you look at the price here for what you're getting for about, probably a late 19th century, early 20th century snuff box for $103, that's quite good. In a lot of ways, this period isn't all that far off, yet being able to perceive medieval craftsmanship all around you is something recoverable, is something that feels lost to our world. I mean, even looking through these late 19th century and early 20th century photos gives me a tremendous sense of loss and grief. I mean, what a strange world to collide, to take a picture of Alexandria from the air when people are pining for medieval styles and looking back to items like this 14th century lamp or this other one that we're calling to folks about history. And the original Mamluk items tend to have this raw historical presence to them. I mean, there's something that's just ultra rare about 500 to 900 year old medieval Egyptian items, where even the mundane everyday items become extraordinary pieces for the collector. And the inlay that happens in this period, especially the inlay that's done for wealthier individuals for special projects, is just truly extraordinary. And yes, there's a bit of the 19th century revival that's a little more utilitarian. I mean, the purpose of the Mamluk style was, in some ways, this strange mesh of modern, early modern mass production, and it's almost sort of arts and crafts movement in its own right, in a different culture with different symbols and histories to play off of. And so you get magnificent pieces like this large brass jardiniere that in a lot of ways are new imaginations altogether, and new combinations of old geometric styles to create lovely pieces of 19th century art. And if you haven't guessed it by now, I'm a huge fan of this category. I think the Mamluk revival is so underappreciated, and frankly, these pieces can be had for steals. I mean, to think of a comparable, even a Chinese piece from a similar time period, and to think that this one sold for less than $750. And the West amplifies demand even more for Mamluk items. And what happens is a sort of collective process of historical rediscovery, and a lot of the sort of ravaging of Egypt's history perks up tremendous interest, and it feeds into this existing artisan network that's already producing these items. And as images of Egypt spread, more and more folks are buying things up. And this is true, especially the export industry in the 18th and 19th century oftentimes was sending true relics out of the country. And, one of it would happen a lot with coins. And coins are something that, a lot of them are made, so we're still finding plenty of them today. And they're the plentiful nature of coins is nice. It's always something I recommend to the beginner collector. But that draws me into this next piece, which is an interesting contrast to the well-patinaed items that we've been looking at. I like pulling up the polished instance of the Mamluk revival period, because this is what it would have looked like out of the craftsman's hands. It would not have necessarily been the patinaed item. As an antiques person, of course, I love a good patina, and I leave my patinas intact. But there's something to looking at this item in this fashion and seeing it in this way that is really kind of special. And the glow in the right light, I can only imagine how beautiful it must be. The photos we're able to use for this project are wonderful, and seeing the street barber reminds us of how many different ways these items would have been used. And pieces like the Mamluk Bowl in front of, or on the screen, that might stick around for a few hundred years, could be repurposed for so many different things. And it's likely that a bowl just like this was used for hundreds of years to wash this or that. And what a lovely bowl it is. And I can see why, you would want to remake things that looked like this and shout it out to sort of a previous era of fine craftsmanship. When you consider the lack of electricity and sort of the brilliant luminance an item like this would have with a candle inside in an otherwise dark environment, you can see that the Mamluk culture were masterful craftsmen and made items with remarkable beauty and precision that reflected their sort of utilitarian purposes. Now, I won't pretend that this recent auction is the fine Mamluk pottery that you might see in a museum, but for the price that you can pay and the item that you get, this is a wonderful sort of entry-level item to an extremely old collecting area for pottery and earthenware. The pictured item dating to the 16th or 17th century for $230 or so plus shipping is an absolute steal. And one of the things looking at these photos kind of contextualizes for me is how stunning some of the original items were to see. And, you know, the sort of the piece de resistance at the Met for Mamluk art is going to be this brazier for Sultan of I believe it's the Raslid dynasty of Yemen. So this is a Cairo export. A brazier is a it's campaign wear. This would be sort of a grill or fireplace that's movable. You have handles on the side, and then rings for spit tops. And I was a little bummed they didn't have a good shot of the interior, because I like to see sort of well-used items. But if you look at this, I mean, the inlay is sort of a pinnacle. And, you know, we're lucky to be living, in some ways, lucky to be living now. But being able to see these items come through either fine auctions or websites or fine antique stores really does offer the modern collector a chance at interacting with some of these pieces of extraordinary history. And the antiques trade is something that it dates back thousands of years. And you know, you could almost say that the Mamluk revival starts with the antiques trade. It starts with the interest in the original medieval items, and as that interest grows and grows, the attention to craft and form proliferates with the era's artists, and it feeds a need for the time. And we end up with some truly wonderful works of art, like this table that was, I believe, recently sold. Yeah, it looks like this was sold. What crossed out 12,000, so best offer accepted. I mean, wow, what a piece. To be so lucky to see this and get to view it. Really special. And here we have the Mamluk motifs just in superb fashion. Wonderfully done. And truly under 10,000, 12,000 seems so cheap. And from there we'll shift to some quick notes for the collector before just wrapping up generally. The religious art from this era is fantastic, and both the original Mamluk art and the revival style have a wonderful character to it that I think makes it a great subject of collecting. And it's unfortunate, but you know, the museums don't want the things that are flowing on the internet necessarily, and if they do, bravo to taking them. And you know, I know a lot of folks who have had conversations with museums about things, and it is what it is. If you're going to choose to caretake for important items, please do it well. You know, these two pages are very important pieces of religious art that have been stored and documented for general use and observation, which is good. And even here, you know, we're taking a look at page that was sold online not too long ago, and not really an expert in this category. Obviously an extremely complicated subject matter, even in determining the bare level authenticity. So again, a reason why dealing with reputable dealers is so important, as well as the the acquisition of some of these items can be less than savory. So it's also complicates things even further. So be careful. These are important items, and you don't want to come by them in the wrong way. And perhaps a little easier, a little lighter, are the plethora of boxes and wares that were made in the metalworking style that can be picked up quite easily, and frankly for prices that are accessible for many collectors. Even the $100 to $200 range has some phenomenally extravagant examples. The period is complicated, and both the original items and the revival style are hearkening to a sense of form and design that I don't think we see topped anywhere else. And even the items that would be considered more mundane, like some of the earthenware, have a certain romanticism about them, and that might be because of a lot of how we perceive the era is through the early 19th century's eyes, whether it's from the French painters that drew Egypt in such a magnificent way, or whether it's from the residents themselves looking at history with a sense of reverence when they weren't ruled by the Ottoman Empire, or the advance of westernization wasn't at the doorstep, and things weren't changing so rapidly. There's a lot of different reasons that a lot of different folks were attached to this period of history. And I think I'll end it with just a plea to say, if you have wonderful items, please take care of them.